over 520 million copies sold. It's the second best-selling video game franchise in history. Yet, for the first 10 years of its existence, its creator didn't make a single cent. Not one. Why? Well, because a simple puzzle game about falling blocks accidentally ignited one of the most high-stakes, chaotic Cold War thrillers the world has ever seen. Welcome back to Learning with Pratik. If you're new here, I try to increase neuroplasticity by exploring a new topic every day. I do all the reading and researching so you don't have to. Today, we're diving into a fascinating explainer on the origins of Tetris. As you'll see, this is a story that drags us from the austere, fluorescent-lit desks of Soviet bureaucrats straight into the ruthless boardrooms of British media moguls, and ultimately, deep into the very physical wiring of the human brain.
Chapter 1. Behind the Iron Curtain. Our story starts in Moscow, in the summer of 1984, with a man named Alexey Pajitnov. He was a dedicated speech recognition and artificial intelligence researcher, working deep inside the computing center of the Soviet Academy of Sciences. He was highly mathematically inclined, loved geometric puzzles, and in his rare spare time, he designed simple computer programs just to test the limits of his hardware.
Pajitnov remembered this physical childhood puzzle called pentominoes, and he wanted to recreate it digitally. But he had a major hardware problem. He was forced to use the Electronika 60, a primitive, heavy piece of Soviet machinery that possessed absolutely no graphical interface. Think about that for a second. To make this work, Pajitnov had to construct his game entirely out of text brackets and spaces just to represent the falling blocks. To keep the gameplay from being mathematically impossible to track, he scaled the block shapes down from 5 squares to 4. He called these tetramonos. Then he mashed up the Greek prefix tetra, meaning 4, with his favorite sport, tennis. And just like that, Tetris was born. He started sharing the game with his colleagues on floppy disks, and almost instantly it became a quiet phenomenon. As historian Box Brown notes, it spread like wildfire across the Eastern Bloc's medical and scientific community by 1986. It was relentlessly, hypnotically addictive. In fact, it was so addictive that the Soviet government actually started viewing it as a profound threat to workplace productivity. It was essentially a digital virus of distraction. Entire departments were grinding to a halt. It got so bad that medical researchers literally had to destroy their own floppy disks just to get their work done.
Chapter 2. The Contraband Code. Now, here is the absolute crucial point, and it perfectly illustrates the geopolitical reality of the time. Pajitnov lived in the Soviet Union. Since it was a communist state, the government inherently owned all intellectual property created by its citizens, especially code written on state-owned computers during work hours. So Pajitnov possessed absolutely zero legal rights to his own game. He couldn't sell it, even if he wanted to.
But software always finds a way out. The code inevitably leaked. A copy made its way to a technology institute in Hungary, where it was ported to Western systems like the Commodore 64. Enter Robert Stein. He's a British software entrepreneur who spotted the game running on a machine in Budapest. Stein immediately fires off a telex to Moscow asking for the global rights. Pajitnov sends back a vague, non-committal reply, and Stein, well, he falsely assumes that this single reply meant he had legally secured the global distribution rights. Spoiler alert, he had not.
Operating on this massive, completely unfounded assumption, Stein turns around and sub-licenses the game to Mirrorsoft and Spectrum Holobyte. These were software companies controlled by the British billionaire media mogul Robert Maxwell. They packaged Tetris in stark red boxes, slapped on some hammer and sickle motifs, layered in a synthesized soundtrack or Russian folk song, and marketed it as this exotic Iron Curtain mystery. It became a massive, undeniable hit on Western personal computers. And meanwhile, the Soviet government, the actual legal owners of the code, knew absolutely nothing about it.
Chapter 3. The Moscow Showdown. Let's jump to February 1989. While the PC market was booming, a totally different technological revolution was brewing over in Japan. Hank Rogers, an obsessed Dutch-born game developer living in Tokyo, discovered Tetris at an electronics show in Las Vegas. Rogers had deep ties to Nintendo. He took one look at it and instantly realized that the addictive simplicity of Tetris made it the perfect universal software to bundle with Nintendo's highly secretive upcoming handheld device, the Game Boy.
To secure those rights, Rogers put his life savings on the line, got a tourist visa, and flew directly into Moscow. This sets up a scenario straight out of an espionage thriller. In February 1989, 3 different men arrived in Moscow at the exact same time, completely unaware of one another. We have Hank Rogers arriving uninvited, Robert Stein desperately trying to retroactively secure the rights he had already sold, and Kevin Maxwell representing Mirrorsoft. They were all there to meet with ALORG, the fierce Soviet tech export agency, directed by a cutthroat and highly intelligent negotiator named Nikolai Belikov.
So, Rogers walks into Elorg, completely uninvited, and proudly shows Belikov a Japanese console cartridge of Tetris. Belikov was furious. Elorg had never sold console rights to anyone. Suddenly, Rogers realizes he's sitting right in the middle of a massive chain of illegal sublicensing and corporate theft. But instead of lying or backing out, Rogers comes clean. He spends hours explaining the entire Western video game business to them. Through sheer transparent honesty and a shared, geeky passion for game design, Rogers actually disarms Belikov and forms a profound, lifelong friendship with Alexey Pajitnov.
Belikov, meanwhile, was a master tactician. He now understood exactly how Stein and the Maxwell Empire had been profiting illegally from Soviet property, so he baits Stein into signing a new, updated contract meant to finally formalize the PC rights. But Belikov inserts a tiny, hyper-specific clause. He legally defined the word computer as a machine consisting of a monitor, a disk drive, and a keyboard. By doing that, he explicitly excluded home consoles. Stein, just eager to get out of Moscow, signs it without even noticing. This brilliant legally binding loophole allowed Elorg to instantly strip the console and handheld rights away from the Maxwell Empire and award them directly to Hank Rogers and Nintendo.
Chapter 4: The Console War. Back in America, the fallout from this brilliant maneuver was absolutely catastrophic. Atari, specifically its 10-gen division, had already bought the assumed console rights from Microsoft. Completely unaware of the trap Belikov had just sprung in Moscow, Atari had already gone ahead and manufactured over 300,000 Tetris cartridges for the Nintendo Entertainment System. A massive, high-profile federal lawsuit suddenly erupts between Nintendo and Atari over who truly owned the game.
That entire federal court battle hinged on a single question of contractual interpretation. What is the exact legal difference between a home computer and a home console? Thanks to Belikov's carefully inserted definition, the answer was suddenly very clear. The NES and the Game Boy did not natively feature keyboards, and they certainly didn't utilize magnetic disk drives. Therefore, legally, they were not computers. The US judge ruled firmly in Nintendo's favor, and Atari's assumed rights were deemed entirely invalid.
The results here were staggering. Nintendo legally released Tetris as the pack-in game for the Game Boy. They sold over 35 million copies, cementing it as the system's definitive killer app. Atari, completely defeated, was forced to pull their game from retail shelves and literally destroy 150,000 manufactured cartridges. And through all of this, the lawsuits, the intense negotiations, the millions of dollars changing hands globally, Alexey Pajitnov received absolutely nothing. After 12 years and billions of dollars generated in the West, the creator finally saw some royalties. It wasn't until 1996, after the Soviet Union collapsed, that Hank Rogers helped Pajitnov secure his rights and form the Tetris Company.
Chapter 5: The Tetris Effect. Now, the legal labyrinth is fascinating, for sure. But why were billionaires and massive corporations willing to fight so ruthlessly over a simple game about falling blocks? The answer lies in the deeply embedded cognitive science of the game itself. You see, Tetris isn't just a fun diversion. It's actually a profound, observable demonstration of how the human brain processes visuospatial working memory.
When you first play Tetris, your brain is forced to work incredibly hard. Cerebral glucose metabolic rates absolutely spike. Your brain is burning massive amounts of physical energy, rapidly trying to map out the spatial geometry of those falling shapes. But after weeks of continuous play, something incredible happens. The glucose rates drop entirely back to normal, even though the player is performing the tasks much, much faster. The brain physically adapts. It reorganizes itself, thickening the cortex to become highly, ruthlessly efficient at spatial processing. This is a perfect, medically observable example of neuroplasticity.
This neurological adaptation is actually so intense that it bleeds right into real life. It's a psychological phenomenon literally coined the Tetris effect. Players start seeing falling blocks in grocery store aisles or behind their eyelids when they try to sleep. A landmark Harvard study conducted by Robert Stickgold proved the depth of this effect. He found that even patients with severe anterograde amnesia, people whose memory centers were so damaged they couldn't even recall playing the game that day, still dreamt of falling geometric shapes. The brain's procedural memory actively constructs and manipulates these images, completely independent of conscious recall.
Today, the cognitive hijacking power of Tetris is being actively utilized in clinical medicine. Oxford researchers have discovered that playing Tetris shortly after a traumatic event competes for the exact same cognitive resources required for visual spatial processing. Because the brain only has so much bandwidth, the game literally interrupts the consolidation of intrusive traumatic memory traces, which significantly reduces the later symptoms of PTSD. Other clinical studies have shown that a simple, focused 3-minute game can reduce cravings for drugs, alcohol, and food by up to 20%. It achieves this simply by occupying the mental bandwidth that the brain needs to actively visualize that craving.
From a quiet Soviet laboratory to tense international courtrooms, and finally, into the literal physical rewiring of the human brain, Tetris serves as an absolute masterclass in how a perfectly designed, simple pattern can captivate the entire world. Does knowing the chaotic, high-stakes origin of Tetris change how you view the game, or do you just see falling blocks when you close your eyes? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Tomorrow we open a different page. Until then, Pratik, out.